Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another product spotlight. Today, I have Matt Gosling joining me. Matt, how are you?
Excellent, Tracy. How's your evening?
Good. It's been a busy day for both of us. You have been busy with a clinic, I think. I'm excited to have you on the show to talk about KWS Hybrid Fall Rye. So, before we dive in, do you want to tell our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Yeah, you bet. I started Premium Ag in 2003, alongside AgriTrend back in the day, and have been practicing precision agronomy independently ever since. I've had lots of other entrepreneurial businesses throughout that time, and most recently we started a research company. And we're also doing research with KWS, looking at some varieties for silage and grain and PGRs and fungicide response. Um, I kind of go, I do agronomy by day and jokingly say that I do my farming at night. So we got four kids just south of Strathmore on a farm, and we raise hay and some annual crops and keep them busy. So
Yeah. So I'm talking to the busiest guy in Alberta right now.
one of them.
One of them, right. Okay, so we're talking about hybrid rye, and I have heard you say this is your favorite crop and the best herbicide on the market. So I'm curious, what makes it stand out so strongly to you, and especially compared to spring cereals? Would you like to expand on that?
Well, I think one of the things I've also publicly said is that herbicide resistance will be one of the biggest challenges I have for the rest of my career.
Hmm.
We've had a good year, like it's super. We had three really challenging weeks in June that really stressed our crops out a lot, and I think it really affected herbicide uptake as well with the weeds. So we've got a good competitive crop, but we've also got weeds. I suspect we've got, well, more and more resistance every year, but I'm 23 years into this. I think I've got 23 left, and the problem's only getting worse. So it is a very easy cultural practice, and where I get the best herbicide on the market for it in using hybrid rye is that it's so competitive early in the year that a lot of the weeds just don't get a chance to grow.
Wow.
So it is a tool in the toolbox. It is a niche crop, but it's been my most profitable crop pretty well every time I've grown it. Like I've got a short resume of crops and farming over the years that we've been on the farm here since 2010, and I've grown it three times, and yeah, I do well with it. And it even through the highs and the lows. That hybrid capacity with that cereal, no other cereal's got that or that genetic horsepower. So yeah, there's challenges, and it's a very different crop to grow than a spring cereal, but I love it for lots of reasons.
Excellent. Oh, I see we have a friend.
Yeah.
Who's our celebrity behind you?
There's Yeti, the guardian dog that likes the taste of chicken.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, more the merrier on the show. So, as we record this, we're beginning of August. It'll go out about mid-August. So, if a producer is listening, watching this August, September, what are the top things growers need to do right now to be ready for a successful hybrid rye planting?
Uh, it was it was taught. Back in my early days, I wanted to do everything right, and there's not really a lot of ideal in farming. So ideally, you'd grow it on canola. Well, our canola just finished flowering. We're at least 40 days away from getting it off in hot, dry weather, and it's cool and wet. So, it's nice to grow on canola, but I've grown it on pulse stubble just fine. I grew it last minute decision 2 years ago. I grew it I got my irrigated soft white wheat off on about September 10th. And the price for milling grain was okay and the conditions were great. So I put it in without spraying. Like it was the day after I combined, I seeded the rye,
Oh, wow.
and it was thick as hair on a dog's back to the point where I was already trying to line up a silage chopper, and the wheat is going to choke out my rye. And all you can do is wait all winter. And it was, I was anxious all winter waiting for my, what is it going to look like in the spring? It looked great.
Mhm.
There wasn't a stitch of wheat in my rye. It went for milling. It, obviously, the frost killed all the wheat,
Okay.
but it didn't affect it one bit. So as I grow, and like anything, the more you ride a bike, the better you get at it. The more I grow a rye, the better I get at it. And it's pretty flexible that way. So seeding date, I think is pretty key. Like I refer to Greg Stamp a lot, and Becca Broughton with KWS in the States. They're kind of my go-to rye people, and um, I've heard Becca say a few times the earlier you can get it in, the better. Um, Even as early as late July, early August. I haven't been that brave, and I don't really ever have a scenario to do that unless it's really early silage. But middle of August, I'd be very comfortable in seeding hybrid rye. So if there is a silaged acre, and typically when we're silaging at the end of July, guess what grows really well on irrigated manured ground with 70 days without a frost?
Mm.
Kochia. Like kochia and wild oats, 1 and 2, public enemy, pretty well every farmer in the prairies that's ever dealt with kochia that's close to the Palliser Triangle. So yeah, those so stubble type, um, fertility is another one. You, there's lots of differing opinions out there. I grow on a very sandy soil, so I put probably just enough to get it through from a nitrogen standpoint at seeding. I'm typically a little more aggressive with the phosphorus and potassium strategy because it pretty well celebrates a 1 year birthday. And sulfur to me has always been based on an elemental strategy. So I always have lots of sulfur. That's never limiting. And then I'll go with a dribble bed. So I've done 3 different nitrogen applications, and the best one that I've had personal results with has been a dribble band at the end of May, sandy soil. So that's one thing Greg and I have a difference in opinions on. He puts all of his nitrogen down at seeding, and I don't know if that's logistical, but it works for him, and he raises phenomenal crops. Um, I've done the broadcasting of urea. Sometimes I've just left it because I've got enough nitrogen in my soil test, and I trust my soil test, and it scavenges nitrogen unbelievably well. And it typically roots down to a meter, and there aren't many, if any, soil tests done down to a meter, partly because of liability. But yeah, those are some of the things I'd be starting to think about now. So crop rotation, nitrogen management, um, seeding depth. That's oddly, I think, one of the most important keys to growing successful rye. I'm I've been for years now, and I don't know if this goes back to Bayer research or BASF or when the switch was, but for canola, I'm a inch and a quarter all day long. None of this half inch stuff. I've had way more trouble with half inch canola than inch and a quarter. Rye is a half an inch.
Okay.
It's a bigger seed, but it takes very little soil moisture to germinate the crop. And if you get that at half an inch, it will be up and out of the ground in less than a week. And don't be scared, it comes up purple. It's a really weird looking plant for the first couple days of its life, but that's just the way it is.
That's fantastic.
So
Okay,
Yeah.
excellent. That is in detail. I really enjoyed that. We're doing a series of video segments with KWS about hybrid fall rye, and there's been some great conversations, and this is fantastic. So thank you. Did you have anything else you wanted to share on that before my next question for you?
From an agronomic standpoint,
Yeah.
um,
Things to know if they're looking to plant, what should they be thinking about right now? Anything else about planting?
well, yeah, the seeding rate discussion is out there. I think I fully support the message now from the seed companies about seeding at 1 unit per acre. So 1 unit is a million seeds. We started at zero point 0.8, or not we, but the seed recommendation was zero point 0.8, and I think a few years ago they kind of upped it to 1. Um, I was a fan of seeding 1 unit on irrigation, and it does come down to a cost thing. The seed cost is a lot more than a normal cereal crop, but it's less tillers. It's that much more aggressive. If you're going to graze it and use it for a grazing strategy, then a lower seeding rate is probably doable. But if you're going to target milling rye and that high end market, I wouldn't deviate off 1 unit. Um, we're doing some fungicide and PGR work. From personal experience, I did apply a fungicide once. It was a panic response. I can admit it. It was I was scared and I put a fungicide down and I shouldn't have.
Okay.
Um, but it was alternaria, and it's a European disease in cereals. I didn't know what it was. Nobody knew what it was, and I sprayed it. But there's so much photosynthetic area on that plant, and I lost my leaves, but I had stem and heads and awns that were still photosynthesizing, and it didn't hurt my yield at all.
Okay.
PGR wise on irrigation, I would definitely support. Um, the yield capacity on this crop, Tracy, is phenomenal. Like I seen some videos from Greg this week. Like they're on the door of 200 bushels. Um, so it's phenomenal. It like 100 bushel hard red crop is a pretty easy bar to jump now. 130, 140 bushel soft white, 200 bushel rye. That's another level. Like it's awesome.
Okay, now I understand why you call it your favorite crop. It
Yes.
all makes sense. Okay, perfect. That is a lot of great information. If you don't have anything else to add, I want to speak to, or get you to speak to, the growers who've never seeded a winter crop before. What's your advice on making hybrid rye work within the broader crop rotation? What would be your thoughts on that?
Um, so like any crop, a lot of it comes down to timing. So I wouldn't get too late with it. Um, if you're getting to the end of September, you'll still get a good stand. Um, I've only ever had to terminate one crop due to survivability, and it had nothing to do with the winter. It was just dry, really dry in the spring for a prolonged period. So it is a gamble. Putting a fall crop in, whether it be rye, triticale, or winter wheat, um, the saying around here, I don't know if you have it that far east where you are, but we call it the magic stampede rain. If you get moisture in the first 2 weeks of July, you usually have an average crop anyways.
Okay.
So the magic stampede rain for a fall crop is late May, early June. I'd even say late May, because if you get to June and you have a dry April and May, it's not going to be like you've got a lot of ground to make up there. So one of the things I haven't mentioned yet either, too, in tips for successful hybrid rye growing is never ever grow a cereal after hybrid rye.
Okay.
That you will. have a really poor experience. You might see it coming, but you can't do anything about it. In barley or wheat, you can't spray it out. And it is such an aggressive growing plant that you might not see it until it really starts to grow. So, when I first started growing it, the suggestion was you got to grow two crops of a non-cereal. I'm like, ooh, I always preach a good rotation, and I like bouncing between a broadleaf crop and a cereal crop. So you have to stick to either peas or canola, something that you can easily control a grassy weed in. So make sure to be, plan your rotation out that way as well. That you have to do that. So, first time tips, seeding depth is a hard one. It can be too dry to seed. Like we have had a few falls where um, some of our farmers will go out and try seeding and it just makes a mess. The seed of the soil, and it is soil type pending, but if you're on a heavier soil and it's blocky and you don't have a nice finish, it's probably too dry to germinate that seed. Um, we've had phenomenal moisture now. Like we've got a recharge, a soil water recharge event year happening, which is much needed. So I suspect our conditions this fall will be ideal to get a really good establishment of a hybrid rye crop. Um, Seed treat is another one that's one that I create a lot of controversy on in spring seeded crops, but fall seeded crops, again, you're celebrating a birthday on this crop, and you're going through a really hard winter.
Yeah.
So I don't have a problem spending money on a seed treat on a winter crop. So that's an easy one. Um, I guess cash flow. The only negative thing I can say about hybrid rye is cash flow, and I say this from a hobby farm perspective. On a larger farm scale basis, usually a niche crop, I call a niche crop at around 10% of your seeded acres. So it's not a huge level of risk
Right.
when you're seeding 10%. You're banking on a few things, but um, you're going to be out cash flow for 12 to 16 months, maybe even longer. So from my hobby farm perspective, when I grow all rye, I got to plan that out to make sure that I've got funds to pay my bills versus a spring crop where I pay my stuff in June or July and I'm getting a grain check in August or September. So that's for a larger farm, that's usually a little easier to plan out, but not many bad things I can say about it. Ergot, a lot of farmers will ask about ergot. If you're targeting the milling market, you're gonna color sort your rye. Like there will be an ergot or two, and usually more on your outside rounds, yes. But I don't think I've ever talked to a farmer that sold milling rye that didn't have to clean it. Like the first year I grew it, I had 18,000 bushels off my small little piece, and I had about 200 bushels of chaff and ergot that I had to take to the landfill. So it was a minuscule amount, but it still had to get done.
Okay. That's a lot of great information. Okay, so I know in the conversation you mentioned that rye hits reproduction around June 21st. Can you explain why this is such a powerful advantage in Western Canadian conditions? This is important.
Yeah, this goes back to a story from Farm Tech. I forget what year it was, but Wheat Pete was giving a presentation, and I never heard him speak. And he said the most important day of your plant's life is June 21st. And it was just a light bulb that clicked. I'm like, yeah, obviously, like we're harvesting a lot of things from the soil and water, but the biggest thing we're harvesting is the sun. So that day, if you can, and it kind of tied back to one of the things that Jerry Stoller told me a long time ago, was the most yield influential period of a plant's life is during reproduction. So if you can hit the most important day of your plant's life cycle on the longest day of the year, that is really good timing.
Clever.
So, well, I stuck my hand up and said, well, Pete, we're typically just finishing up herbicide spraying at that time. Like we're nowhere near anthesis on June 21st. And he said, I know.
Mm,
So how do we get there? The only way to get there is by growing a winter crop,
right.
hence 200 bushels. So there's a lot of things that set rye up to grow it.
Yeah.
You know, we're maximizing every growing degree unit possible for that crop to harvest carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, all the nutrients, all the water. It's a phenomenal plant.
Wow. That is fantastic. This has been a great conversation, Matt. You have an in-depth knowledge about this, and I'm glad that we connected for this segment.
Yeah. I guess the only other thing, Tracy, like it was I forget what tour it was, but Becca was there and I've used this quote everywhere. She said, use and abuse this crop.
Mm,
And we were talking with a bunch of mixed operations that had cattle and the silage aspect of it is something I've never really talked about either. Um, a very large cattle operation in southern Alberta. Before I started growing it, and it was kind of getting new to the market, I went on a little crop tour. There was just six of us, and this guy finally spoke up and he said, "The only reason I grow barley is to keep my chopper busy between rye and corn."
mm.
He said, "Rye does better in the salt. It doesn't get disease. It stands better. It roots deeper. Yes, the seed costs more money, but there's all these other things that save me money." So I thought that that was super powerful that they can essentially run their chopper for 90 days straight.
Wow.
They'll start in June on rye at the boot stage, and then they'll go to barley, and then they'll go to corn. And even before the corn, they'll recrop that rye into oats. So it might be rye, barley, oats, corn, and they can chop every day for 90 days, roughly.
Wow.
From a grazing perspective, I've got a feedlot that we're just trying this strategy on this year. They finally got a quarter silaged here last week, and we're putting down the I think maybe even a .7 rate down, and they're going to put 800 pairs on a quarter this fall, and however many yearlings this spring to keep it under control because I'm worried about it growing too much. So if it gets to that point where it outgrows thousands of head on a quarter, then we'll terminate it before it gets too big, and then we'll put a spring crop in there. So
Interesting.
use and abuse this crop. It's great.
Wow. This has been so educational. I love this. Thank you, Matt. I
You're welcome.
really appreciate you spending the time speaking to our audience and sharing more information. I know there's such growing excitement and a lot of information to be shared. So I really appreciate your time and your knowledge. Thanks, Matt.
You're very welcome.
Okay, you in the audience, if you enjoyed this and had those light bulb moments like I did, like it, share it, and get it out there so other farmers can watch this segment as well. See you next time. Bye bye.